Lovely talking to you. A very good morning and welcome.
Assalamu alaikum. It's so great to be back with you, Julie. Thanks for having me.
Walaikum salam. Lovely, as always, to talk with you. And of course, I think the entire financial world globally is jittery right now. I've just heard that the Iran has decided to shut off the Strait of Hormuz. The implications, of course, are absolutely far reaching. But would you like to comment on that? Because it does tie in with what we're going to talk about and global finances, and particularly for us here in South Africa.
I mean, it's so interesting. I know that the Parliament had given approval yesterday and that it has to go still through a leadership council and then to the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Now, that's still a process, I think, that involves strengthening Iran's hand if there are any negotiations now to return to. The other, which would be far more dangerous, the other action Iran could take would be direct attacks on roughly 50,000 US soldiers in about 24 bases that are all around within middle and short range distance bombing, unlike Israel, which is a longer term. And we've seen how devastating the Iranian attacks on Israel have been. So I don't think there's any question that if there was to be a full war, there would be major U.S. casualties. Last time, you could say the U.S. Had major defeats, Afghanistan losing completely, Iraq partial loss, and there the casualties, the actual fatalities of U.S. soldiers were in the low thousands. But if there are 50,000 at risk and there are major battle ships that would have a couple of thousand soldiers each sail, that would be the most serious extent of say, expansion. Shutting off the Strait of Hormuz might be a short-term tactical show of strength, but clearly the major losses will be for countries like China and India that have become very dependent not only on Iranian oil, but also on all of the other oil and gas that comes through that 33-kilometer strait. That is that very narrow place that is relatively easy to disrupt. Now, the Houthis had a sophisticated approach, which was to allow some ships, the Chinese, at some point the Russians, that was on and off, to go through the Red Sea, to go up to the Suez Canal, but to stop other ships, especially with what were obviously Israeli destinations. Some of that actually forced South African coal to be rerouted, not the short way up the east coast of Africa, but around the west coast and through Gibraltar and the Mediterranean. And that might be one of the things that the Iranians are going to say is sort of a selective sanctions or selective cut to the Strait of Hormuz. I think that's a bargaining chip. And really the big question is whether did the US do real damage? If not, if it was just symbolic, it was performative, very, very deep bombs. We can't really see much from the surface because they penetrated very deep. The Fordow installation, especially in the mountains, and whether underneath there wasn't really anything to explode, no processed uranium, because it had all been moved out in the prior days and weeks. And if that's the case, if there was really, there's no evidence of any radiation, probably the Iranians were smart enough to find a different place to hide this partially processed uranium. And I think then they might end up saying, well, there's really nothing to get revenge for because, you've just blown up some empty spaces.
However, that is the current thinking around the globe, isn't it? That all the if there was uranium, it had been moved out. And the Iranians themselves have put out a statement as such, suggesting that there was nothing left in Fordow, that it had been moved. And I kind of also wonder, was that smart of them to have made that statement? Because having said that, then undoubtedly Western forces would want to get at the uranium, the supposed uranium that they have moved from Fordow elsewhere in Iran. And even though there was no uranium, and even though the Americans had bombed those sites, the fact of the matter is it was and is an invasion of the Iranians' space, their rights, their country, their very existence. So obviously, we've now seen the retaliation, whether they are strong enough to hold on and cause more damage to Israel, whether Trump will decide to go in full force, because he's now threatening that they now need to talk peace, else there's going to be more calamity on the Iranian people. You've also talked about 50,000 odd troops in and around the Middle East area. They've been present forever and a day. But I'm kind of wondering if Iran does in fact strike those American troops and bases, are we not perhaps then heading into a third world war? From the time a couple of years ago, from the time 7th of October, I've been asking the question to various analysts that could this possibly be the start of the third world war if the situation in Gaza is not stabilize, normalize, and if the genocide, if Western powers put pressure on apartheid Israel to stop the genocide, that perhaps we can avoid going that route. There is a possibility that we could see this being the start of the Third World War.
Oh, you're right. The chaotic way the Trump administration, very, very brutal neoconservative Marco Rubio, who for a little while pretended he was a paleo conservative, more an isolationist, not a warmonger. He was playing that game for a few weeks. It didn't really dissuade anyone. And of course, Pete Hegseth, the gung ho macho militarist, the defense secretary. Now, Trump plays all sorts of games. You don't know which way he's going to move on any particular issue. The economic interests do seem to sometimes affect his decisions. And World War III, or even a sort of escalation to the point where many more targets are chosen, and the Iranians' logical response of blocking the Strait of Hormuz, which is about a third of the petroleum and a little less of the gas that comes through the whole world every day. That would then wreak havoc on the economy and the corporates, especially the New York Stock Exchange, which do seem to have some, some power to persuade him, back off. What we've seen immediately is about a 3.5% rise in the oil price just in the last 24 hours, and it could go much higher depending upon what the Iranians decide to do. And that would certainly kick off a recession plus inflation, stagflation, and that's exactly what Trump was elected to avoid. He was elected to bring jobs back to the United States and to lower the price level. So his MAGA base will be furious. In fact, it's actually interesting. You can sort of see divisions in this ridiculous far right macho white male culture. And one part of it, and here we get major figures like Tucker Carlson, the sort of most important of the Trump loyalists, who's now breaking absolutely with him, or Steve Bannon, who was formerly the key strategist for Trump. And they're isolationists. They don't want to see another war. They don't want to see U.S. troops deployed on the ground in Iran. They don't want to see the dangers of Iranian missiles, which, they're coming 30, 40 a day still, suggesting that there's no end to the ability of Iran still to make missiles to go to Israel. So there's no sort of questioning yet of whether Iran runs out of steam the way there is for the Ukrainian fighters against Russia. And in that context, divisions in the U.S. are important. Trump broke the U.S. Constitution, which says that the Congress, not the executive, not the presidency, is what the institution that will be declaring war. And what Trump has done is it's very unconstitutional, illegal internationally. And so I think that'll be part of the, you saw 5 million people on the streets against Trump about 8 days ago. And that was a sort of, let's say, potential for civil anger and civil dissent in the US. But as I say, also this MAGA base beginning to say, well, we didn't vote for another warmonger whose actions will certainly help the military industrial complex and maybe the oil companies, because U.S. oil, goes through the roof. If world oil does, it doesn't get too much in danger. There's obviously U.S. companies in the Persian Gulf, but they'll be sitting on their stockpiles of oil. And the oil price increase is usually good for one crucial part of Trump's base, this fossil fuel complex, and he's going all out to walk out of climate negotiations and promote more oil, coal, and gas drilling in the U.S. So if we're looking at a sort of balance of forces, I mean, if Europe is hit hard by this, Trump will probably smile. That'll be good for him in the sort of internecine battle within the West. And if China is really badly affected by not having access to all that shipping oil, India as well, then probably Trump will be relatively pleased that in the balance of forces, he's doing something and keeping this pressure on. For us in South Africa, yeah, we're going to see higher prices at our pump. We have a few export areas. They've included diverse things. We don't export that much to Iran, but we do export things like coal. That was the number one export until a couple of years ago. And now also we're exporting meats to Iran, and we're importing dates and other fruits. Those are sort of, let me say, relatively small scale trade relations that are threatened by the potential shipping or air links that might be disrupted in this process. But overall, you're right to first say, is this a World War III? What can we do to prevent it? Some protests on Saturday at the U.S. consulate here in South Africa. We need to see much more of that. But also, what can we do in a way to de-link South Africa and I hope much of the world from that pressure that the U.S. continues to put on economically and geopolitically? And of course, we've got the biggest, pressure point we could potentially have right now, which is the G20 hosting, and whether Donald Trump, now clearly a rogue, regime, should they even be invited to come? Should we have a G19 now and maybe toss out the U.S.
Professor Patrick Bond is my guest. He is professor at the University of Johannesburg, UJ, of course, Department of Sociology. Lots more questions. We also want to touch on BRICS, the BRICS summit coming up between the 6th and the 7th of July, the impact of the current situation on BRICS or vice versa. We also want to look at other issues regarding this current situation between apartheid Israel and Iran. And of course, it also then suggests if we do avert a third world war, there is still going to be lots of mayhem in the Middle East itself. We understand that a couple of UAE countries have stopped flights, international flights. That, of course, is also a very clear message that things are pretty unstable in that part of the world. But so much more to uncover on the show this morning with Professor Patrick Bond. Please stay with us. We're going for our first ad break. We'll be back with you in a minute or two.
This is Salam Media.
It's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
They say breakfast is the most important meal of the day, yet many children go to school hungry because of poverty. Penny Appeal South Africa's Breakfast Club aims to get a warm, hearty meal to underprivileged children so they can spend their day prospering in their schoolwork. Help feed a needy learner for only 5 Rand a day, or 150 Rand a month. Or visit our website www.pennyappeal.org.za or call 031 1100 573 to find out how you can donate. Penny Appeal South Africa. Small change, big difference.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African African experience. For reservations, call now on 042 203 1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Gaza needs your support more than ever. Homes have been shattered and families have lost everything. With your support, our teams are delivering clean water tankers, feeding the hungry, and assisting orphans who have no one left. Let us give Gaza whatever help we can. African Muslims Agency, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Valley's Motor Spares. We supply motor spares and accessories for all makes and models of motor cars, LDVs, buckies, trucks, and earth-moving equipment. We deliver on time, every time. Please contact us via WhatsApp on 014-592-0925 or call 014-592-0925 or visit 28 Zenderling Street, Rustenburg. Remember the name, Valley's Motor Spares.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
Welcome back. I'm talking with Professor Patrick Bond. He is a professor at UJ, professor of sociology, and we're also discussing matters around economics, global economics, and the impact of this current unprovoked, I should imagine, war on Iran. Would I be correct in saying it was unprovoked?
Oh, yes. I mean, what Israel did was to, I think, with Netanyahu's own popularity at the point where he might have lost power in recent days, he obviously began these strikes and then provoked Donald Trump to join. And Donald Trump had always sort of said doesn't want to get involved and was sending signals, especially through his national security advisor, Tulsi Gabbard, the main security sort of official, who has a sort of a left-wing and peace-oriented background deep in her past, obviously changed dramatically to serve Trump. But he basically said to her, I don't believe what you're saying that Iran is. She said, Iran is not trying to develop a nuclear weapon. And the enrichment of uranium up to sort of 60% level, whereas there's still another 35-40% to go to get to the point of having nuclear weapons material. That wasn't going to happen, and that was her convinced position. Now, of course, that had to change. So, yeah, I think the word unprovoked is correct. It's provoked by Benjamin Netanyahu's desire as a warmonger, but it's this historic desire going back probably 40 years to have the U.S. join in a bombing raid on Iran.
This is almost, very reminiscent of what happened in Iraq way back. And obviously Bush was saying that they need to go into Iraq to destroy the weapons of mass destruction, only to find that after they decimated Iraq and displaced millions of people and upended the global economy, there were no weapons of mass destruction. And then we also go to post-Vietnam, the situation, the suffering on the psyche of the American people. Vietnam took a toll on the psyche of the American people. It seems as if history hasn't taught the Americans or the American government anything at all.
Oh, it's true. And that's maybe what Dwight Eisenhower back in 1960 warned as he was leaving office. He was a president and had been himself one of the key generals in World War II. But he
and by the way, sorry for the interruption. We mustn't forget what's happened in Afghanistan as well. So, taking this entire Middle East region into a context here, you kind of wonder just what is going on. Is Western imperialists wanting to get their hands on the land and on the resources?
Yes.
And it's a frightening thought. Back to you, Patrick.
Absolutely, that this threat that Eisenhower made, reflected upon, which was that the military-industrial complex would take over U.S. foreign policy, and its desire, especially in Vietnam, where 2 million local people were killed, and about 60,000 U.S. Fighters were killed in the 1960s until 1974. The U.S. lost and had to run away. But that was something that you could say has a certain logic, and the logic is profiteering by Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, a few others. So let's say that that's part of it, and they have very strong lobbyists and create a mood in the U.S., especially in Congress, but amongst this sort of working class white base that maybe the U.S. needs to have more military power and be strong again. Much of what MAGA represented was actually the opposite. That is to say, we've had too many wars where we've lost. We've lost our own soldiers. We've lost lots of our treasury. And so this is a big conflict. As I say, I think we were going to watch a lot of fracturing of the Republican, the white male support base for Trump, some going in this way that Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon, and a few others are saying, sort of isolationist, and others going, let's beat the Iranians and using all the Islamophobic sort of imagery. But to come back to the rest of what's been happening in the military terrain in West Asia, it's also over control of oil. And the US became much less oil dependent because they opened up their own fracking, that is the gas, the methane gas that they can get from inside the US, that new technologies that allow them to drill horizontally and break gas out. And that made, during the Obama regime, the US much less dependent. But you could imagine that the US would say, but we still want to control the Middle East because we want the ability to turn off or on the tap of oil from our friends, Saudi Arabia, UAE, particularly, and then our enemies, Iran. And that to me is, and then of course, turning off the tap to Iran means turning it off to China, which the US still sees as, in this ridiculous way, as the main enemy. And I think that gets to the bigger question you've posed. It's not just that this imperialist and Zionist axis with the militarism and the hunger for oil is now sort of working hard to wreck the region, to wreck Iran, to have an overthrow of the Iranian government. But there's another force which is meeting in Brazil, as you mentioned, the BRICS, the Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus this year, 5 new members. This year, Indonesia, the largest Muslim country, joined. And last year, Iran joined, along with UAE, Egypt, and Ethiopia. And Saudi Arabia was meant to join, but then chickened out. As Donald Trump won the election in November, the Saudis began to delink. And as the Russians, who were the host last year, said, we've frozen their role. So I was just in Brazil 3 weeks ago. I haven't seen that sort of role of any Saudi influence whatsoever. But the others, you can just imagine that the Iranians come to the table in Rio on July 6 and 7 and say, guys, what is going on? Are you not going to help us? Because frankly, it doesn't look like there is much solidarity with Iran. And indeed, if you look at things like trading patterns or South African export of coal to Israel, or Russian facilitation of massive oil, Brazil, 9% of Israel's oil is coming from Petrobras. And then from India, it's military relations and the privatization of the Haifa port, now under major stress from Iranian bombing. China also partially privatized the port of Haifa and is also supplying those DJI drones. You remember seeing Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, killed with that little drone. And those drones largely come from China. And then you've also got $20 billion of annual trade between Israel and China. And I could go on and on. Obviously, UAE and Egypt have been very much helping Israel against Iran's bombs. So these are, they may on the surface decry Israel's bombing, but in reality, because they're US sub-imperial allies, what we're looking at is quite a split BRICS. And on July 6, 7, you could be an Iranian leader or foreign minister. I'm not sure who's going to be able to go over to Rio at that point, given the pressures. But they'll be very angry that the BRICS are actually two-timing them, talking left, walking right, talking about a Palestinian state, but having so many important relations with Israel.
Before we do wrap up, 2 or 3 very important questions that we do have to touch on. A while ago, there was talks about introducing BRICS currency. There was a lot of talk around it, but clearly the US wouldn't and are not happy about that type of talk. Do you think that if BRICS decides to go that route, and I know that it's not an overnight process, it's very long-winded, and it will take a couple of years before it's introduced. Your thoughts on that situation?
I would love to see the de-dollarization. I happened to work in the U.S. Federal Reserve for a few years under the man called Paul Volcker, who was the most destructive central banker. He put up the interest rates in 1979. He caused the third world debt crisis. I think he killed more than Cecil Rhodes and King Leopold put together in that process. I'd love to see de-dollarization because that power to either print money, quantitative easing, or to raise interest rates is devastating. It's the so-called exorbitant privilege. The BRICS aren't the vehicle, though. I've concluded I'd love it to, if I were wrong. But don't take it from me. Ibrahim Rasool, our former ambassador from South Africa to Washington, told Mr. Seminar, the famous one where he talked, I think, quite correctly about Donald Trump's white supremacism. But he also said, don't use that word, de-dollarization. Don't make them angry. He said, Russia's not doing it. China's not doing it. So aside from BRICS pay and a little bit of trade facilitation, which would then be, you could do sort of back and forth with your own local currencies until you start running a trade deficit or surplus. And that's the problem that Russia and India came to realize as Russia exported lots more energy after the Ukraine invasion at a cheap rate, and India then couldn't really respond with a trade balance. So there's a lot of rupees sitting in India that can't get out to go to the Russian oil companies, and those are the big problems. That's why there's a dollar as a medium of exchange. We desperately need something different. Julie, my conclusion on this is that if you look at the ruling crew in Pretoria and the way in Treasury and the Reserve Bank they connect to our Johannesburg banks, the same in Sao Paulo, the same in Mumbai, the same in Shanghai, the same in all of the new BRICS. I mean, it's really only Iran and Russia who have material interests in their ruling classes avoiding the US dollar because they've been under sanctions. Most of our bourgeoisies are unpatriotic. They are looking west and therefore dollar dependent, dollar addicted, and therefore they're not going to allow us to actually have a de-dollarization. It's not even that Donald Trump warns us 7 times he's going to put on new tariffs. His theater. But it's actually, we have a problem internal with BRICS. I'm not the only one saying this, I can assure you. Even the likes of Pepe Escobar, a very pro-BRICS guy, and many others are saying, well, we've actually got a serious dilemma that the capitalist classes in the BRICS are not going to work to rearrange global geopolitics and economics in a way that will support the world.
So many more questions. I'd love to sit here all day picking your brain, but we've run out of time. Hopefully we can connect up again and take this conversation further. Thank you indeed, Professor Patrick Bond, for your insights on this matter. God bless.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah.
It is exactly 8:38. We need to move along, and lots more coming your way. Next online, we're going to be talking with Dr. Sats Cooper, President of Pan-African Psychology Union, and we're going to be looking at the power of the people right here in South Africa. Please stay with us.